Hello, welcome to Typically Unique, our new podcast. I'm Kim Aponte,
And I'm Carlos Aponte.
and we are a married couple. We raised two children. We're now empty nesters. We've decided to start a podcast to share our stories, situations we've gone through as a family.
A lot of the stories may have to do with some situations that we had with, our children, them growing up, some health concerns. But, we may talk about almost anything during this podcast. But I think it was important for us to document everything that we kind of went through, some of the trials, tribulations, good times, bad times. And we really think that we can maybe add some context to some things that happen to us and may affect some of you in your lives.
Yes, there was a certain point where things had happened where I knew for sure someday I wanted to do a podcast. So we have some goals with this, and one of them is to shed light on things that happened with us, trying to get help for one of our children in the mental health care system, and huge roadblocks we hit with that. We want to help others who may be dealing with that, shed light on the issues. And part of this is also us debriefing things that we had to work through and deal with. And there have been some strong repercussions from a lot of the stress and trauma that we have gone through as well. So, here to help, here to give advice whenever we can, just from experience.
I
Share.
also think there's opportunities to pay it forward, right? I think there were certain people along the way that we met or helped us, that things we didn't know when we were struggling parents or struggling in our relationship, or just struggling in society or at work. People that reached out and really were big influences on us or set us on the right path. And then we ran into some roadblocks, some tangible ones and some human roadblocks. And, how we were able to navigate around some of those things really um, tested our patience, our love, our resolve. And, for us to be here today doing this, I think shows the stick-to-itiveness we had, even through some very tough times to get to this point. But we should almost back up a little bit and talk about why we chose the name Typically Unique. I know this was an inside joke between us, but Kim tells it a lot better. So why don't you explain why we came up with that?
The moment that I knew I wanted to do a podcast, I knew this was going to be the name because our son battled AML, acute myeloid leukemia. And so we lived in a hospital for pretty much 2 years. And anytime something came up in the hospital, we were met with the response either from the doctors that was either, well, typically, this is what we would do, or that's a typical situation. And, or we would get, oh, well, that's unique. And we have to look into that. We're not sure. Oh, this is a unique situation. And, usually one of us would be at the hospital, the other one would be home. So we were communicating with each other. And pretty soon it just became, what response did you get? Was it typical or was it unique? And then it's, I'm sure this will come out in some of our stories, but it even flowed over into some of the other services and systems that we have dealt with. So Typically Unique had to be the name.
Absolutely. And, part of this documentation, I think that we want to do is maybe selfishly for us, right? I think we took a lot of notes during the big watershed moment in our life, which was the AML leukemia, which halted our family, halted our lives, and, changed the course of where we thought this family was going to end up, after 18 to 20 years of raising children. But that was a big watershed moment. But we knew that our son was fighting health issues when he was very young. We didn't know it would culminate with AML leukemia. So we even started hearing a little bit of typically unique when he had another issue when he was younger, to the point that I think we started playing off of, well, if this is unique, what do we need to do about it? If this is typical, then, why can't we resolve this? So
Right.
I think we spent a lot of time turning those two phrases, which to us felt dismissive. Every time we asked about something,
Yeah.
oh, that's typical. Well, if it's typical, let's resolve it. Or that's unique. Oh, if it's unique, okay, then let's investigate it, right? But it was used as dismissive terms.
Yes.
And you will find out about Kim and I that we are not easily dismissive people. So those terms didn't fly with us. And that is something that I think drove us going forward, that we weren't going to take those dismissive terms and just be okay with it and sit back in the corner. Is that how you kind of saw it?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Our son was born with a rare immune disorder, Brutans disease. The scientific term is X-linked agammaglobulinemia. So he had that, and through like the first 10 years of his life, and I don't know, help me out.
Well, that's a chronic condition. So every 3 weeks, 4 weeks, he would get this infusion to help give him the um, T
Oh
cells,
yeah.
B cells, whatever he needed to keep his immune system going. And we were told pretty much on day one that of this diagnosis, after they falsely diagnosed it as leukemia, which showed up later in his life. But they told us, he's going to live with this for the rest of his life, and
It's
that
hard. It's hard not to get into all the details of all these stories because they come flooding back. But basically, we have a child who was born with a rare immune disorder. Then 12 years into his life, he's diagnosed with leukemia. And then he survives that with a bone marrow transplant. And then we deal with mental health issues. And that just created traumatic events for our family. We have a daughter. Our son and daughter are only 13 months apart. Um, you know, she was healthy growing up and always having to. I learned the phrase being what did I tell you it was called? The mirror, the glass child, because you see through them because, there wasn't anything wrong with her and she was always having to. And in fact, I remember her being about 5 years old and our son coming home, we kept coming home from some doctor's appointment and her saying, now what's wrong with him? Now what's wrong with him? Um, so getting into those teenage years after we think we're past these major life battles, I mean, that was the fight of our life. That took every ounce out of each of us individually, out of our family collectively, out of us as a couple. And then we had to face yet another challenge with the aftermath of that and things we went through with our son in his teenage years and even still today. So
And we'd like to say that this is maybe a happy story, right? I mean, we had our own, personal issues. The good news is we're here today doing this podcast together. We have had a couple children, and we always had hoped the best for them, not only in their health, but in their adult lives and their relationships and who they become and who we thought they'd aspire to. And not all the stories end happily, and a lot of the stories are still taking place. But I think it was important for us to say, let's go back to the beginning, because maybe there's a fork in the road here for us now as empty nesters to say, how much do we need to continue interjecting into the lives, of the people around us? Or is it time for us to take that step back? we don't know the answer. We struggled with that every day. Um, but I think going to the beginning is going to help us recreate a little bit of the history, because if you can understand the history of what our family went through, and it's not just Kim and I and our children, but my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, her brother-in-law, our nieces, our nephews,
Our
our
parents.
parents,
We had a huge community support. I mean, just so yeah, when you were saying that there's lots of good that we can tell and share too. There is hope. So, through these stories, we want to provide hope because we do have a lot of happy outcomes. And it's the outcomes that aren't so maybe happy or positive that I always want to try to fight for change, for things that, because there is that part of our story where, we try to go through the system that is in place for help. And I felt we were failed miserably,
well,
horribly.
We didn't go through the system. We had to go around the system. So we want to definitely talk about some of those situations where we had to go around the system. But to Kim's point, change comes when we don't have to go around the system, right? The system's there to protect, our kids, our families, our communities, and that's what we want to have the system set up to do, is to be able to have people easily go through some of these processes to get the help and the resources that they need, to build a stronger family and come out of it maybe better than we ended up coming out of this situation again.
So, this podcast is typically unique, and we hope you will join us on our
journey
as we share these stories.
Awesome.